My name is Chris Bryant and I'm the Minister for the Arts and Creative Industries, and in that capacity I'm here hosting First Draft. This is the podcast that champions the creative industries. I'm Chris Bryant, I'm the Minister for Arts and Creative Industries, and this is First Draft. And today I am joined by Kate Varah, who is one of my favourite people working for the National Theatre. I shouldn't. Too much favouritism is a very bad thing. But Kate, just remind me how long you've been at the National.
I have been there for 2.5 years. Be coming up to 3 in the spring.
Right, and you're changing boss or
colleague.
I don't know. Do you think of it as colleague or boss? How does it work?
Yeah, it's sort of worked differently over the history of the National Theatre, but Rufus Norris changed the shape of it, actually, when he was working with my predecessor, Lisa Berger. They became co-chief execs. So previously under Nick Heitner and the directors before him, it was the director who was the chief exec and director. But Rufus, in my view, rightly identified that actually in any arts organisation today, it is a really strong marriage of the artistic and executive lead who take a lot of the responsibility as a sort of shared dividend. So he rightly, I think, made a co-chief exec appointment of Lisa with the board, and then I have come in and I'm co-chief exec with Rufus, and now we'll be co-chief exec with Indu Ribasingham, who I'm delighted is going to be starting as my partner in the spring.
And was that what you always wanted to do in life when you were a 7-year-old? I don't know, I'm putting you in ballet pumps for some reason.
In Leamington Spa.
In Leamington, yeah. Royal Leamington Spa, no less. Yeah. Royal National Theatre.
Yeah.
Is that what you always wanted to do?
Do you know, I probably would have said no, other than I met up with a very old school friend the other day, and she was chatting to a uni friend, and they both said as one, don't you remember you always used to say that you wanted to run the National Theatre? Okay. So for me personally, whilst I love other art forms within our sector, theatre just does that for me more. I connect with stories, I connect with the people telling them much more profoundly when I'm sort of wrapped into the world that I think a theatre production can create for you.
So can you remember the first thing you saw ever at the National?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that before we came. It might not have been the first, but the most memorable production was Arcadia, the Tom Stoppard, which yes. Trevor Nunn, I think, directed under Richard Eyre and Janista, which was starring Rufus Sewell.
Jenny Mac.
Yeah, and Rufus Sewell was with Emma Fielding, and it was just this sort of sexy, brilliant production about my sort of sweet spot in theatre is sort of something that's got historical resonance, but is sort of been whipped into a different kind of story or perspective, and that's what Arcadia did. And I remember very clearly thinking, wow, this is like artists at their zenith, kind of creating something extraordinary.
You are so young. So young. I'm going, okay, so the first...
What was yours, Chris?
I can remember I went to 2 shows, consecutive nights. The first night I went and saw Michael Gambon in Galileo.
How amazing.
Bertolt Brecht. Complicated play, but I remember to this day the moment where he piles on all the layers of the costume to become the Pope. Yeah. Quite extraordinary moment. And then the next night is Warren Mitchell in Death of a Salesman. Huh. So it's like 2 great,
totemic performances.
Yeah, completely. And I was, and in different theatres, obviously, Proscenium March and
the Olivier.
And the Olivier. And I have no idea how much it cost, but I remember just being really struck by that experience, and that you could see somebody who you knew from television. Warren Mitchell, of course, famously from television, playing fairly right-wing racist TV character in a comedy, and then seeing him do Death of a Salesman with an American accent is like a complete transformation.
But that's, I think, what's so brilliant. I mean, at the National, because we have 3 stages, you can literally have a varied diet in the course of a week of theatre going. You can be in the Dorfman, which is sort of 400, 450 seats, and you see some sort of piece of new writing in particular there. You can go and see some barnstorming show in the Olivier, which is based on Epidavros, so it's got this really sort of wide amphitheatre. And then the Littleton, the Pross Arch, where you can see, tends to be Well, actually, before Rufus, it tended to be more classics reinvented, but actually he's brought new writing back into the centre of both of those big houses. But I love the fact that you can have that complete variety of your experience there. It's a very special thing that our National Theatre has. I think that ability to create, and we have about 16 shows a year that we create on the main stages. All of them are sort of developed within our new work studio. And the sort of the alchemy that happens when you've got the different categories or genres of shows in those houses, and how the audiences even spark with each other when they're in and out.
Now, repertory used to mean, well, the National used to be a repertory theatre in one sense, in that actors would be in more than one show at the same time, and you wouldn't have one show on for 4 weeks in a run. They'd do 2 nights and then you'd swap around and so on. That's not the package now, is it?
No, it was a COVID thing actually. Pre-COVID, we were in rep, so you could see a variety of things at any one point, and they would sort of last for longer. There's a couple of reasons that we haven't gone back into it fully now. There might be a future where there's a hybrid version of repping in some of the houses, but just more expensive to manufacture and to do, and to keep people on contract for longer. But also, sort of, artist and company appetite has changed. You've got the big streamers coming in now who are hiring people on multi-year contracts with very specific option dates, and actually getting somebody to commit to a long rep period at the level of our artists that we need. It's quite difficult. Normally what they actually want now is saying, look, we've got this option date, so there's this window, and I'm going to do one piece of theatre a year, and can you book me for that thing, please? So it actually, I think, has ended up suiting some of the casting perhaps better than it used to, where before they would sort of pepper their year with some telly and some voiceover and some radio. And it's not quite the same climate now. So I think the National has adjusted and adapted for the time, as well as because of a financial imperative.
Right. And is your hope with every production that it'll end up becoming a warhorse and it's going to tour the world and still be around 20 years later? Well, I mean, the RSC's got its own versions as well with Matilda and Les Mis, I guess.
Yeah. Look, the aspiration is always that there is a future life for that production, and I've sort of inherited this unbelievable legacy of the digital work of the National as well as the live, which means that even if it doesn't do a warhorse and gallop around the world for, we've taken it to 14 countries, 9 million people have seen warhorse, it's sort of become its own phenomenon. You will see it, Chris, you will. We'll make sure of that. But we'll literally galloping around to your house. But it's... The thing about that is, it was an extraordinary thing to do, but actually there's a really valid future life for a show that doesn't do that, but is shown on our streaming platform, NT at Home, or goes into schools. We're in 89% of state secondary schools with our NT collection, which is effectively a free collection of 70 or so titles from the National and other theatres. So there's always at the National some version of a future life. Yes, it's amazing when we get those, those kind of classic phenomenon hits. But it's, very rare. You could pick a couple from the RSC. Back in the day at the National, there was One Man, Two Governors, Warhorse, Curious. We've had Lehman, under Rufus's tenure, doing beautifully. These things are sort of hen's teeth in a way. And if you could make an art out of a warhorse, or at least make a science out of a warhorse, you'd probably not be sitting. It might not be art. And so I think it's a sort of, we will never let the commercial imperative get in the way of the artistic intent.
But I might get this wrong, but one of the things in lots of other parts of the creative industries that people say to me very frequently is it's very difficult to access investment.
Yeah.
I don't mean particularly government grant or anything. I mean, lending, borrowing, for ventures like touring and so on. Is that true for the National, or does the National have to approach things from a very different perspective because you're a public body?
Yeah, I mean, we only really think about investment when we're taking a commercial show out on the road. But actually, I'd actually question at the moment whether there is such a thing as a commercial tour, because the touring market is so incredibly tough at the moment. For us, we have our commercial production arm, NTP, where we do raise investment to take shows out. But predominantly, the work that we do is funded by the state, and it has a multiplier effect. So everything that the government gives us, we effectively can make work harder for itself by leveraging that for philanthropy, leveraging that through our box office. So it's a sort of mixed income model that really relies on the state, not the church, the law, the state, the philanthropists and our audience to make all of that work. And the philanthropists are really key. And I mean, this is the same for colleagues across the sector. When you're in the non-profit sector, we've had, without being too sort of boring about it, but it's really relevant. Since the National was founded in the 60s, we've had a 52% drop in our government funding. So we're now about 16%. So it's hugely problematic for us because we now are having to go out and look for funding in places that we might never have done. So yes, it's really hard to raise funds for us and for everyone, particularly hard for regional colleagues who are not sitting next to the city and can't offer up some of the benefits that we can in London. So it's a good point to raise because it's a really live conversation in the sector. How do you raise the money to go out on tour? How do you make sure that you can reach as wide an audience as possible? And increasingly we're turning to digital for that, actually.
I know that you'll get the correct figure for this, but I think when Andrew Scott did his Vanya online, you had phenomenal figures for just that. It was up for one day, wasn't it, or something?
Yeah, well, we've do some more sort of encores for that, but that's part of the sort of three things you can do with the digital work at the National. You can put it into cinemas as a live broadcast, or you can put it streaming into people's homes and sofas, or we take that thing into schools. So the streaming is slightly separate, but the Vanya, we first of all started it off in cinemas, because for some of the shows, the marquee shows, you sort of know that there's an audience for that in cinemas across the country. And that's one of the kind of things I inherited, which is so brilliant, is that it isn't just the National Theatre shows. We filmed sort of the best of British theatre. Right. So that's the thing that goes out to countries around the world. It's a sort of the kind of collection, I suppose, a portfolio of things that we as a creative industry have created in the country. But it is amazing. By the way, the NT Live thing, the thing I love about it is you can be in Stornoway and there is literally a sort of mobile cinema that drives around. Yes. And so in a way, although it is something that brings in revenue from cinema audiences, I sort of think of it as community outreach as well, because it's a way of democratising access.
Well, I suppose it's one of the things that Lisa and Andy and I have been quite keen on in the whole sphere of the arts, is because, I'm not complaining about money being spent in London. London has its own needs as well, and so on, and it's obviously very attractive for international visitors. But I do wonder about how can you make a national organisation, or an organisation with the term national in it, genuinely national across the whole of the UK. And there's a challenge there for the National Gallery, there's a challenge there for the National Portrait Gallery, or whatever. What does that challenge look like for the National Theatre?
No, it's a great question, and we're really sort of keen to answer it, because actually we have a different model to some of the museums and galleries. So, I'm not as familiar with the way that they have to work. But for us, we are a national theatre. When I showed Secretary of State a map of where we are in the country, you can't see any green. We are everywhere. We have our postcode and our HQ in London, but the work is national. We're in, as I mentioned, there's 89% of state secondary schools, but we've got 100 partner theatres that we work with across the country. There's youth groups that participate in all of those jurisdictions. We're in every local authority. We're in all counties. We sort of, I don't think of us in any way, shape or form as a London organisation. 60% of our audience, even for the shows in the South Bank, come from outside of London. So in a way, I spend more time sort of disproving the myth, if you like, than I do worrying about how to achieve that thing, because we're doing it every day. Our learning teams are more out of London than in. So it's quite important, I think, that we as national organisations shout about that, because colleagues out there, I'm sure she won't mind me saying, and I'll apologise to her afterwards if she does, but Julia Fawcett, who runs the Lowry, when she was asked by Arts Council the other day, what is the single biggest intervention that we could make to support you and the ecosystem here in Salford, she said, fund a national to tour. So all of us, this ecosystem point is
there's
really
a real
important.
problem about touring.
There is.
Not just for, there's various different versions of that. Touring in Europe for musicians.
Yeah.
There's an issue about touring theatre in the UK and some of the receiving houses, not being very well matched for productions and just expense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got amazing network of colleagues in all of those houses, some producing, some receiving, but all of them who want to work with us to get that work shared. And time again, the issue is that we're not able to be there consistently enough. So the big problem is we need to go regularly. The circus coming to town every year, well, you know that the National Theatre will just come. And every year, I don't know what the show is. I've never heard of it before, but I know it's going to be good because I trust the brand. And the more we can do that, the more we can develop our audience outside of London. And that then means that it's just a less risky proposition. The reason it's so difficult to fund at the moment is because we're all, we took Ocean at the End of the Lane, an extraordinary 5-star hit family show that got amazing reviews everywhere it went. We played at very, very low percentage capacity numbers, partly, I think, because we hadn't been out on tour because of COVID for a number of years. And if you're not being fed a varied diet, it's not something that you end up seeking out or looking for. So it's our job to make sure that we're there regularly with our colleagues at Chichester, the RSC, others. We need to be regularly touring in order to make sure that we can help develop those local audiences for quality drama.
It's Chichester, I think, that's done Oliver, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it worth the waiting for?
I haven't.
Did you see what
seen
I did there?
Yeah, I did. I like that.
Just
yeah.
checking.
No. Do you want to do another one?
No,
Actually, you did brilliantly at the Creative Industries Summit, where you were literally, it was line. I mean, I can't compete.
It was the first film musical I ever saw when we lived in Spain. I think it came out in 1968, maybe the film, something like that. And I watched it 7 times in a week.
Would you say what's your favourite genre of drama? Is it musical theatre?
Well, I don't know. I think the favourite thing I've seen in my 2 favourite things I've seen in the theatre in the last 2 years are The Motive and the Queue, which I saw twice, which is just amazing. And I now do quite a good impersonation of Mark Gatiss doing John Gielgud, which is quite an obscure thing to do. So that was amazing. And Sarah Snooks in the
amazing Dorian Gray.
Which was amazing because of it. It was such a congruence of technology with theatre and showmanship and all of that. I just thought it was amazing. But that takes me to a question I did want to ask you, which was about theatre prices, ticket prices, because I can't remember what the tickets were for Sarah Snooks, but I mean, a lot. I went to see View from the Bridge, which is an amazing production. Yeah. Same theatre, again, very expensive. And that didn't, as Sam West had.
Yeah.
But some of the theatre tickets at the moment are just beyond.
I suppose the first thing I'd say is, I regularly go to New York because we work a lot there. And if you're trying to get a ticket for a show on Broadway, you're sort of upwards of, £400.
Yeah.
So we're still cheap as a sector by comparison. We're also...
I think good value is...
Good value, you're absolutely right, Chris. Sorry, good value.
Reassuringly
can we edit that out?
Maybe.
But we're still good value in comparison to Broadway. We're also good value in comparison to buying a ticket for a Premier League football. The West End, of course, has premium pricing, and that's partly because commercial producers, speaking for my colleagues in the commercial side of this sector, they don't have the cushion of subsidy.
No.
So they are taking risks every time they capitalise a show. And of course, there are some big names that people have heard of that are commercial producers, but the majority of the sector is based on commercial producers who are kind of 2, 3, 4, 5-person bands who are raising all the funds themselves, taking the punt on that, and need to put ticket prices at a level they know they can recoup. So there's a bit of that going on. I think within the subsidised sector, that's why we work really hard to keep our ticket prices affordable. So at the National, our average price is £33 a ticket, but you can get 50% under £50 and 25% under £25. It's something we set our stall by, and we will dynamically price, and that is important. It's built into our model. So there are shows that go up, but I'm not going to apologise for that because it's Robin Hood pricing, because there are people that will pay that and can pay that, and we will always ring-fence accessible tickets for those people that can't. And again, that's the value of the digital work, because it is super democratic. You can pay £99 a year for your NT at home subscription, and then your whole family can watch a show as many times as they want. You could see Motive in the Queue 10 times, Chris, if you had it. But we'll give you a subscription. Actually, what you could do, we could get you dressed up as Mark Gatiss in it, because we keep all of our props and costume in this green store that we've got to reuse and recycle, so you can literally relive the experience.
Is it going to New York? Is it going to Broadway, by the way?
Yes, we'd like it to very much.
That was a politician's yes. Yes, we'd like it to.
Theatre availability in New York
Right.
is always contingent on that. It's also contingent on actor and creative team schedules. And with a creative team and a group of actors of that stature, as you might imagine, trying to wrangle the date that they can all do. And we have been wrangling, and we continue to wrangle all the time. We know that it's something that we need to take to New York. It's absolutely resonant production there, but you'll be the first to know.
I notice sometimes that there's a lot of Hamlets go on or in a year, or it seems to be Much Ado About Nothing this year. There's 2 Much Ado About Nothings, and I heard a secret that somebody else is doing Merchant of Venice next year, in addition to the Merchant of Venice that I went to see a few weeks ago, Ian McKellen. And I just wonder, is that sometimes chasing the curriculum?
I mean, all of us, anyone who's...
I'm not decrying it if it is, it's just that,
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's a bit like buses. So there's a few reasons, I think, why you get this collision of titles. Partly, it's absolutely curriculum-based. We have this big grid, and of course, we are really clear that part of our job is to ensure that teachers and students get access to work that they're going to be studying, and it makes it come to life for them. So we're always watching that. We don't program by rote, but we will always keep an eye on that, and curriculum favourites and things that teachers tell us, and the schools we partner with are really, really brilliantly helpful on that. But also, there's something about the mood, right? So when you're thinking about how you program, you're programming to the zeitgeist, you're programming to what people care about, think about, are talking about in the moment. So you will often get enlightened artistic directors at different places picking up on the same mood. It's a bit like when you're commissioning writers, the writers will be responding in a Dickensian way to the mood of the country. So you might have 3 plays about climate change, or you might have, 6 plays about, the rise of fascism. You can go with a trend that your artists sort of provide up to you and with you, as well as some of the more sort of scientific, I suppose, ways of thinking about how you program. But yes, National Theatre's had that Hamlet on its stages 13 times since it, in fact, started with the production of Hamlet, which is Motive in the Queue. Well,
one of the great things about Motive in the Queue is that you get some of the best bits of Hamlet in a kind of condensed version.
Yeah.
I think I've seen a lot of Hamlets. A lot. I must be into 24 by now, I think.
Well, the good thing about the condensed version, it actually reminds me of one of the stats that I loved hearing from our NT collection, which is the digital work in schools, is that the average watch time of a show in a school classroom is 22 minutes. Right. Because, of course, the teacher's got to get them in, wheel the telly, and all of that. So actually, when we're thinking about how to reach our audiences now, and particularly young people where they're at, we're starting to think a lot more about the short-form content. How can you condense things? How can you take the clips, make the best of something to try and make it easier for teachers who are really stretched? And if you think about some schools where there aren't any trained drama teachers, because there's been a massive decline in training of drama teachers over the last 10 years. We've had 42% drop in the number of students taking drama GCSE. Yet you've got history, which has risen 7%, or maths 4%. We've got this massive problem, actually. When we talk about our ecosystem, it begins in school. And if you can't get more kids...
Oh, completely.
I mean, I know you care about this passionately.
It's one of our passions that we want to... It seems to be... obvious that, for a start, all the creative industry, all the creative education that you can get is a force multiplier for all the other elements of your education. So it's not just, you don't do drama because you want to be an actor. You do drama because it gives you self-confidence, you're part of a team, all those, you're able to express yourself through somebody else's words, all those different things, which are useful in every line of work that there can possibly be. So no, I mean, we're very sold on that, and obviously we work closely with the Department for Education to try and achieve that. I want to go back to a question about the National Theatre, because which is contradictory of a question that I asked earlier, but you might not notice, which is that the theatre itself sits in Lambeth.
Yes.
Lambeth is has a large black ethnic minority community. Mostly when I've been to the theatre in London, that community is not in the theatre. It might be occasionally on the stage, but it won't be in the stalls or or watching the shows. Is there more we can do in that sphere?
Always, absolutely. And there is nothing clearer to us at the National than seeing a piece of work that we programme that speaks to a particular community and the correlation between the number of that community who will come in and watch it. So when we had Hot Wing King, Pulitzer Prize winning play, Katori Hall last year, our statistics around global majority audience members tripped off the charts. When we had Tupperware of Ashes, and we had our British Asian audience coming in with Mira Sayal as the real draw for that. Again, huge numbers of diverse audiences in those shows. So we know...
That was magnificent, by the way.
Thank you. It was really beautifully done. And
I can't remember whether I told you that I went on the day that I had learned that my father had died of dementia.
Chris.
No. So it was important because I hadn't been able to cry until the theatre enabled me to cry, because it's a story about a woman, dying of dementia and her family's reaction all around her, and meeting Mira afterwards and talking about it. I mean, that was fascinating as well.
No. Oh, that makes me want to cry. But that, by the way, goes back to your very first question, which is why does all this stuff matter? And it matters because of exactly that response. And we had so many people coming up to us saying, I saw my experience on stage and it resonated with me, or I understand better now what someone went through in COVID when they weren't able to be with their loved one in that moment. Anyway, so I'm glad that it did the thing that it needed to. But those shows are just evidence that the more programming we can do, which speaks to different demographics, different communities, the better. And Rufus has done a fantastic job of that at the National over his 10 years. And Indu and I have a lot of conversations. I know she's passionate about this, particularly as well, thinking about international voices. So she's got a real sort of world prism, I suppose, on her programming. And it's too early to give any even spoiler alerts as to what's going to come out in the announcement in the spring. But what I will say is that you absolutely should expect to see different kinds of people's stories reflected on our stages, even more than you have already. Because we know that the next sort of generation of theatre goers does not look like you and me. But
you have
really
to do
important.
a bit of the canon?
Always, but that's the joy of 16 shows and 3 theatres. We can absolutely provide, again, that varied diet, so we can make sure that where it's exciting and appropriate, we update a canon text and we make sure that it resonates for today. Equally, we will have a host of writers and writers of the lifeblood of our sector. At any one time, we've got about 100 shows in development in our new work studio. And under Rufus's time, I think about 60% of the shows on the main stage have come from that studio. So it's a really sort of fertile sort of ground, or a crucible, if you like, of my favourite play. Of
Arthur Miller?
Things. Yeah, I love that play.
Okay. Actually, I don't. I think I had to do it at school, and it irritated me. All about witches, isn't it?
Well, it's about cancel culture, which is why I think it's deeply relevant today. And watching kids watching that story written in about the 50s, in the 50s, about 1693, whenever it was written about in Salem, written in the 50s with McCarthy and communism, and then watching children today. I literally see myself.
The thing is, when I was at school, I don't think we were allowed to know that it was also about McCarthyism.
Right.
We just thought it was about witches.
Yeah, not so interesting.
No.
No.
But interestingly, I referred earlier to going to see View from the Bridge, and what was really striking about that production was everybody going at kind of the big moments, and you go, that is something that you cannot get anywhere else, other than when you're in a room with whatever 800, 2,000, whatever it is, people. And they are suddenly struck by something that was written in the 1950s And yet yet it can still be completely and utterly
provoke
shocking.
that response. Yeah, totally right. The thing that someone asked at we had a big session for schools the other day, and they said, "What's your favourite moment working at the National Theatre?" And I said, my favourite moment is when two bits, when I'm in the middle of a show and I look around and the alchemy that happens when 1,000 people are emoting at the same time, laughing, crying. I mean, that thing. And then at the curtain, standing up, looking around, seeing everybody with their faces full of joy, applauding, reacting, speaking to each other, connecting in a way that they hadn't when they walked in. They kind of came in as individuals, walked out as an audience, that old phrase. And it's magic.
I think one of my favourite moments ever, I'm sorry, this is another Royal Shakespeare story. Which I
We love the RSC. Yeah.
But it was Nicholas Nickleby, yonks and yonks ago, it was 2-play version that they did, and John Woodvine.
Wasn't that the Old Vic?
No, I think
Maybe
it was
it
at
came
the
to the
Aldwych
Old
Theatre, or one of those.
Yeah.
Anyway, I can't remember, but I think I'm right in saying John Woodvine played Father Nickleby in it.
Right.
And at one point, he also played the opera singer when Nickleby has gone to the opera. And he just started singing some, cod opera kind of thing, very impressively, wearing a wig. And then, the moment that scene was over, he just took the wig off, walked over to his desk, put the wig in the drawer, and suddenly he is Father Nickleby again.
Yeah.
And it's just that moment of, okay, we know that this is pretense, but we're going with it.
Yeah.
It's that moment of suspension of disbelief and breaking the fourth wall and all those kind of things. It's just so special.
No, it is. And that sort of then comes back to the creative education point, because if you learn how to understand and do that when you're at school, and all of those things then come massively into play when you're creating skills for whatever job you're going to do. I was watching my son's drama GCSE devising piece, and I was looking at the kids all interacting with each other, and there is not a single other GCSE where you have to show that level of teamwork and respect and understanding and emotional connection. And all of those things then play forward. When we have this amazing festival called Connections at the National, which is in its 30th year this year. David Yellow actually started in it. That was he was the first cohort, and then ended up back in Coriolanus, and it sort of made his National Theatre debut formally. But in Connections, the skills that you learn through that literally last throughout your professional life. And the kids that come through that, some of them come into our sector, and it's great that they do. But the others are basically sort of tentacled out across the country. And I was a really good example of that. There were two moments last year. One, someone from McKinsey was doing some amazing pro bono work for our sector. Yep. And she walked in and she said, "Oh, by the way, I love the National because I'm a collections alumni. And it was transformative for me, and it gave me the confidence to apply for my job at McKinsey." Wow. And then I was doing an HMT Treasury Away Day, and I was talking about Connections, and there was a room full of 30 Treasury folk. And I said, "Oh, by the way, has anyone heard of Connections? It's this thing." 3 put their hands up and said they were part of it. So all of us in the sector have, the National's not unique, all of my colleagues in the sector have versions of that. And what we're doing is, providing those skills for our sector, but we're also making sure that the workers of tomorrow are emotionally connected, resilient, show teamwork. It's an essential. It's not a nice to have.
Now we're going to do our little quickfire round, which is completely unexpected. Neither of us knows what we're going to ask each other.
It's true.
And you've got a very naughty look on your face, which is worrying me slightly. So my first question is, what is the play that you think you should have seen, but you have never seen?
Waiting for Godot.
I played Vladimir.
Well, I should have seen that one, shouldn't I, Chris?
Well, I don't know. Do you need any existentialism in your life?
Chris, who would play you in the play about your life? Who would be the actor that you would choose?
Well, very weirdly, there has been a production in the Lincoln Center in New York, in which there is a character called Chris Bryant who comes on singing in a karaoke bar, Big Spender.
I did see that.
Yes, the gentleman who played me doesn't look like me at all. Certainly doesn't have ginger hair.
No, but surreal, right? Seeing
so
yourself
I
on
think
stage.
what I really want is Daniel Craig to play me.
Very good.
It's a bit ambitious, isn't it? Anyway, next question. What book are you reading at the moment?
I am reading Mary Oliver, Devotions, which is an anthology of poems, because doing a job like this, getting into a big old book doesn't really happen that easily. But I love having by the side of my bed poetry that I can literally read one, and it just lifts my head before I go to bed. And hers are just beautiful. One of my favourite quotes from hers is, "What would you do with your one wild and precious life?" In the spending review... What would be the thing that came out of it that made you, it was the biggest present for you for our sector?
So I think when John Maynard Keynes was around and commenting on, he was the first chair of the Arts Council after the war. He said that the Arts Council was brilliant, but the one thing that it wouldn't sort is the capital problems of the arts. And so if there's one thing, I think we've got to find a way of addressing over the next few years, it's the capital issue affecting, I mean, I know, you've got massive issues with the drum and the fly and all sorts of different things. The building next door to you has got problems as well. And you could replicate that for nearly every theatre in the land. I remember the very first time I got onto American TV was because I had asked a question in the House of Commons about British theatres built by people like Frank Matcham ages and ages ago, and because they were built for Victorian bottoms rather than modern American bottoms.
And did the Americans
what were we going to do
that?
about it? And I mean, it's a legitimate question, I mean, we're different shape and we're different sizes, so of course all of these things have got to change. I love it when you go to a theatre that's been completely revamped and feels like a completely welcoming space. So it's that capital bit is the bit that I would really...
endorse. I completely agree with that. And actually, thinking about the missions and how we're going to achieve them, I don't see how you can achieve them without actually digging into capital, because it does all of those things that you just said. I mean, the bottoms bit is actually relevant to box office and growth, and making sure that skills are dealt with, because you've got a whole load of people that aren't patching a roof and actually got time to train the next generation of apprentices, or figuring out how to get shows on stage, because then we actually have something for soft power and for the national work. So all of that relates back to capital. So I'm with you.
I would just like to say that we didn't stitch this up before.
We didn't. We absolutely didn't.
Stitch this up
we
before,
both genuinely believe this is the answer. Thank you, Chris.